The question is, ladies and gentlemen, is the story that Stephen just referred to true? Because if it's true, then there is hope. If it isn't true, there is no hope. So let's check it out. Let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates lying on the roof next to him receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's high school in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, San Diego, California, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet. There's only 3 of these ships in the world, and one of them is named after Mansour. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. "There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends," said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people can tend to embellish things. And it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. Who here in this room has ever seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for at least 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Why? Because it doesn't happen. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you're going to realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity's true. Not just true for me, not just true for you, but true like gravity's true. True for everybody. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah. That's actually from our TV show, which is on Wednesday nights on DirecTV channel 378. If you don't have DirecTV, it's on Roku. How many people have Roku? Do we have Roku in here? Okay, look for NRB TV on Roku, National Religious Broadcasters. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping flower mound right now. It's called the internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, there's our website right there, crossexamine.org. The show is streamed live on our website. And by the way, our executive director, Lynn Handley, lives here, and she's here right now. Where are you, Lynn? There she is, the great Lynn Handley, ladies and gentlemen. She runs Cross-Examined right there. Anyway, we're on TV. We're also on radio, a bunch of stations around the country. I think there's one in Dallas here, an AFR station. What is it? What's the 90.5, but it's also podcasted. So if you can't get the radio station, it's the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. We actually do 2 a week. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. This is going to serve as our outline here tonight. And at the end of this, I'm gonna show you a way to get the entire PowerPoint presentation because you're not gonna be able to keep up with me because I have limited time and I'm from New Jersey, all right? I speak at 150 words a minute with gusts at 350, okay? You cannot listen in Southern, all right? So at the end, I'm just gonna give you all the slides, okay? Why are these the 4 questions? Does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people say there's no truth. You got your truth, I got my truth. All truth is relative, right? Well, if there's no truth, Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either. Now, if there's no truth, that doesn't make any sense because we all know there's truth. In fact, if there was no truth, would you ever go to school? Would you ever read a book? Would you ever be able to catch someone in a lie if there was no truth? No, lies presuppose truth. So we're gonna deal with that question first. The second and third questions we're just gonna look at briefly because we have limited time. But does God exist? Obviously, God has to exist for Christianity to be true. I hope to show you tonight by just citing 3 arguments that God really does exist. These arguments are in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, you can show that God exists without any reference to any religious work. Did people know there was a God before there was a Bible? Of course. Are miracles possible? Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible, and none of you have seen a resurrection. Yet I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible, even atheists are admitting the evidence for. And if that miracle has occurred, then resurrections are possible. Then the key question is the New Testament true, particularly with regard to the resurrection? Because if the resurrection occurred, Christianity's true. If the resurrection didn't occur, Christianity's false. In fact, that's what Paul says to the church at Corinth, right? He says, if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, your faith is in vain. Do you realize that Christianity is a religious worldview you can investigate and discover whether or not it's true? It's not just someone's philosophy. You can check into this and see if this really happened. If it did, it's true. If it didn't, it's false. And from that point, you can show the entire Bible is the Word of God. We don't have time to get into that tonight, but it's all in the book. So what we're gonna do is start here at point 1, does truth exist? Are you guys ready to go? All right, now whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, that was pretty weak, Flower Mound. If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle the truth. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try that again. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't you always want to do that with Pastor Ron? Like he's up here and you just yell, I can't handle the truth. Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, if you don't get anything outside of what we talk about here tonight, whether you're an atheist or a Christian or anywhere in between, this is going to be helpful. Why? Because we're going to talk about the most important thinking skill I think I've ever learned. And to show you what a dimwit I was, I was 33 years old. I already had a master's degree, and I did not know what I'm about to tell you right now. And you know why I didn't know it? Because I never had a course in logic. How many people in here have had a real course in logic? Can I see your hands, please? All right, see these people with their hands up? These are the homeschoolers. There they are, right there, okay? We don't teach logic in public school. If we did, public school would be a lot better. But instead of teaching kids how to think, we're teaching them what to feel. And that's dangerous. Why? Because if you live your life by feelings and impulses, you're gonna wind up in a very dark place. Yeah, logic, emotion makes life fun, but logic makes life safe. And what we're gonna talk about is one law of logic that if you get your mind around and can apply it, it's gonna save you from a lot of pain and suffering. Why? Because if you start living by false statements and principles and philosophies in our culture, you're eventually gonna smack up against reality and it's gonna hurt. And this thinking skill will help you avoid that. What we're gonna do is apply the law of non-contradiction. What's the law of non-contradiction? It says opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. Like, for example, we can't both be at Rock Point Church and not at Rock Point Church at the same time and in the same sense, right? It's one or the other, but not both. God can't exist and not exist at the same time and in the same sense. It's one or the other, but not both. You guys with me? All right. So what we're gonna do is apply this law of non-contradiction to so many of the statements we hear in our culture, like this one. There is no truth. This is the relativistic postmodernist claim. They claim there is no truth. If someone were to ever say that to you, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, if somebody says there's no truth, you simply ask, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because this is a self-defeating statement. What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction. If this statement is true, it's false. You see the problem? It claims to be true while at the same time claiming there are no truths. It violates the law of non-contradiction. It would be like if I said I can't speak a word in English. What would you say? Hey, you're using English to say it. Or it'd be like if I said my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child, right? These are self-defeating statements. And here's how you need to apply this thinking skill. What you want to do is you want to turn the claim on itself by asking a question. So if someone says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you ask, is that? Now, you can amaze your friends with this. Why? Because you're going to be able to point out illogical statements they make, but you can do it in a kind way. You're not making statements, you're asking questions, right? They say there's no truth, you ask, is that true? And then you be quiet and see what they say, all right? Let's do a few more. Suppose someone says there's no such thing as absolute truth. If you turn the claim on itself, what question are you gonna ask? Yeah, is that an absolute truth? Well, you might wanna say, are you absolutely sure? Can everyone see this is an absolute truth claiming there are no absolute truths? Again, it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Now in our culture, it's more said this way, or at least intimated this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. You know, you've got your truth, I've got my truth, you live your truth, I'll live my truth, we'll all get along. This sounds so right, doesn't it? It sounds like we all ought to believe this. It sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? Yeah, the problem is it's logically self-defeating. Because if you apply the claim to itself, here's the question you can ask. When they say there isn't the truth, only my truth, you simply ask, is that just your truth or the truth? In other words, is the statement on top just your truth, just your opinion? Well, if it is, why should I believe it? But if you're saying the statement on top is the truth for everybody, can't you see the first half of the statement says there aren't any the truths? Can everyone see this is a the truth claim, claiming there are no the truth claims? It's logically self-defeating. Now, I know it's very unpopular in our culture to say this, but I've got to say it anyway. There's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just the truth. I mean, if you want to say you have your own truth, you might as well say I have my own math. I mean, imagine if, say, Pastor Ron said, hey, Frank, can you hang around Rock Point another day tomorrow? Because we got some work that needs to be done around the church, and I think you can do it for us. And if you do, if you hang out, I'll pay you $10 an hour. You just tell me how many hours you work, and I'll pay you. Now, actually, Pastor Ron would never do this. He doesn't pay that much. All right. But let's say I did. I hung out the whole day tomorrow. I worked dawn to dusk, 15 hours, I'm done. He goes, okay, what do I owe you? I say, okay, $10 an hour times 15 hours, you owe me $150,000. He's gonna say, no, I don't, I owe you $150. And I go, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. He's gonna say, you're crazy. There's not my math or your math, there's just math. Now, parents, I'm not talking about the kind of math your kid brings home and you go, this isn't my math. No, I'm not talking about that, okay? Look, there's one answer to a math problem, not my answer or your answer, but the answer. The same thing is true with regard to truth. Now, how about this? You're gonna hear this. This is big in our culture. You ought not judge. In fact, Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrites? All right, let's leave Jesus aside for just a second. What's the problem logically with the claim? Yeah, if somebody says you ought not judge, if you turn the claim on itself, you're gonna ask, hey, isn't that a judgment? Or if they say you ought not judge, you can say, if we're not to judge, then why are you judging me for judging? Now, did Jesus say don't judge and stop right there? No, you need to realize that there are no verses in the Bible. What? There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew was writing his biography that we now call a gospel, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1. No, when were those chapter and verse divisions added? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is really important. It'd be really hard to find your way around this big series of books we put under one binding if you didn't have numbers. I mean, imagine if you didn't have numbers in your Bible, Pastor Ron didn't have numbers in his, and he just got up here one Sunday morning with this big book, and he opened it, and he just looked at you and he went, let's go about 2/3 of the way in, let's see if we can find the same spot. Right? You couldn't do that, right? You need numbers to find your way around. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. We can't do that. We got to read around the passage to see what's going on. Now, no extra charge for this, and some of you are going to hate me for this, but I don't care. I'm leaving tomorrow, okay? This is why you should never say Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you. What's Jeremiah? You know Jeremiah 29:11. Oh, the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, plans to give you hope in a future. Is that a promise to 21st century Christians living in Flower Mound, Texas? Who is that a promise to? That's a promise to the exiles who were taken from Judah in 586 BC by the Babylonian dictator Nebuchadnezzar. He took them to Babylon, and Jeremiah, or God through the prophet Jeremiah, was telling those people, I got a future for you. I'm gonna bring you back into the land 70 years from now. I'm gonna prosper you. And in 516 BC, they did go back into the land. They did prosper. God's promises came true. But it's not a promise to 21st century Christians today. When people say, I'm claiming Jeremiah 29:11 as a promise to me, I say, why don't you claim Jeremiah 44:11 as a promise to you? What's Jeremiah 44:11? Jeremiah 44:11 is the promise God made to the exiles that went to Egypt in 586 BC. And he warned them, don't go to Egypt. You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? It says, I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. You don't see that on a coffee mug. You don't see that on a birthday card, happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. That is so sweet, Grandma. Thank you so much. We're taking stuff out of context. You can't do that. Same thing is true in Matthew 7:1. Does Jesus say, judge not, and he stops right there? No, what does he say? Judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, notice that's a judgment, you hypocrite. Take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge, it's actually a command on how to judge. Don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. In fact, in John 7:24, Jesus says, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. You gotta make a judgment, whether it be a Christian or not, whether it be an atheist or not. Everybody's making judgments. The only question is, are your judgments true? Now, There are many more self-defeating statements. We don't have time to go through them tonight, but I want to just point this out. Can everyone see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? This means that relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Tragically, most of our universities and many of our high schools have bought into relativism and postmodernism. Why would you ever send some kid to a university at thousands of dollars a year so some professor can tell him the truth that there is no truth? If there is no truth, why am I even going to school? Which is why we go to college campuses a lot. I was just in a university down in Beaumont. I was at UT Dallas a few weeks ago. We're going to be going to LSU and a few other schools this semester. And we always set up a microphone for Q&A. This is an event we had at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and they love the Bible there about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And we always have the microphone set up for Q&A, and if an atheist or a non-believer gets up to the microphone and expresses any hostility at all, or normally stop and ask this question, and I recommend you ask this question of anybody who's not a believer. Here's the question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no. No. Wait, I thought you claimed to be reasonable. I thought you claimed to be rational. How is it you wouldn't believe something that was true? Because it's not a matter of the head, it's a matter of the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God over their own lives. They're not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Now, here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun, but ultimately selfish and sinful things. Yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in this room over 40 years old knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves. If you just live for yourself all the time, it's not going to work out long term. You're going to wind up divorced, alone, addicted, broken, and probably prematurely dead. If you want contentment, you got to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. So always ask people, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If the person hesitates or says no, not a head problem, it's a heart problem. And most of the time, it is a heart problem. They don't want it to be true. They want to go their own way. Now, truth does exist. It's self-defeating to say it doesn't exist. Let's just spend a few minutes on the next question, does God exist? Is it true that God exists? And I mentioned there are three arguments we're going to look at just briefly, don't have time to dig in, that are in the book that show that God exists. There's actually more than three, but these are the three main ones that we look at. The first is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. And telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, life, there has to be a designer. Now, there's scientific evidence for these arguments. The third argument isn't scientific in nature, it's more philosophical, yet it's the argument you've all known since you were a very small child. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, or it's wrong to shoot 9-year-olds in a school, there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against some school shooter's opinion. If there is no God, if there is no standard of righteousness outside of ourselves that we're obligated to obey, then you can't say any of those things are really wrong. Yet we all know they are really wrong. So this standard must exist. I don't know if you've noticed this, ladies and gentlemen, lately. There are people out there in our country that seem to be creating rights about every 10 minutes. You notice this? And many of these people are atheists. Do you realize that if there's no God, there are no rights? There's not only no right to abortion, there's no right to life. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. There are no trans rights, human rights, Christian rights. There are no any rights unless God exists. And yet many people inventing these new rights are atheists. They have no way to ground these rights. Yet our country had it right when it started by saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created and endowed by their government. No, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and governments are instituted among men to secure these rights. By the way, that's why you should be engaged politically to secure rights. Even your ability to preach and live the gospel is at stake. Let me just say one thing about that, and maybe during the Q&A we can get into it more. What happens if you don't like either candidate, like me? Remember, you're not voting for one person. You're voting for 5,000 people to go to Washington and implement an agenda, implement a platform. Look at the platforms, compare the platforms, see which one is more biblical according to the more important matters of the law. That's what Jesus said when he's talking to the politicians of his day. Who were the politicians of his day? The Pharisees. They were on the Sanhedrin. And in Matthew 23:23, he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. You're tithing your spices, but you're neglecting the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You know, we're doing the same thing in this country. We're neglecting the more important matters of the law. We're telling people what light bulbs they can and can't use, but we won't say, don't murder your children. One candidate in this race wants to ban plastic straws, but she doesn't want to ban child mutilation. Is she neglecting the more important matters of the law? Vote according to the more important matters of the law. I wish we had likable candidates. I'm sorry, we don't. But vote policy over personality. Rights are at stake. If you're going to love your neighbor, make sure laws are put into place to protect them from evil. Now, we don't have time to go through all these arguments, but I just want to spend a little time on the first one. Now, you got to admit, it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Some of you say, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. There it is. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big. Now, I know there's some Christians in here going, Frank, you know, we're Christians and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 6 years ago, said this about the beginning of the universe. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Despite being an atheist, Hawking said there is a beginning. Now, we don't have time to go through this. It's all in the book, but I want to just point out one thing. If space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing, which even atheists are admitting, what could have caused that? Only something outside of space, time, and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Also, the cause would have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet, this could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God. But if we keep going through the evidence and we realize that Jesus really did predict and accomplish his own resurrection from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,991 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. You don't get all the way to Jesus with one argument from science, but you get what appears to be a cause like the God of the Bible, and the way you verify it's the God of the Bible is you see if Jesus really did die and rise from the dead. And if he did, then he's God, and whatever he teaches is true. He is the creator. All right? Now, As I say, there are these other arguments. The design argument is amazing, the fine-tuning argument. In fact, let me just give you one fact about the fine-tuning argument, that the universe is precisely fine-tuned, that if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe, imperceptibly, we wouldn't exist. One of these is the ratio of the gravitational force to the strong nuclear force, which is fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 40th power. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent from Central America all the way to Greenland and stack it in dimes all the way to the moon. That's 238,000 miles. Then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. Take all those dimes, put them in one humongous pile, mark 1 dime red, mix it in, blindfold a friend, throw him on that pile, ask him to pick 1 dime at random. The chance he would pick that 1 marked red dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he gonna pick that dime? No. The chance is 0. In other words, that value was either designed or it wasn't. What makes more sense to believe? Somebody designed that value to be right where it is. And that's just one out of over 100 of these when you combine the factors about our universe and the solar system. This is why even atheists are saying that the fine-tuning argument is the hardest one to answer. That's why they come up with multiple universes to try and give them more possibilities. They're making stuff up, ladies and gentlemen. And if you add the moral argument in, guess what you get from these 3 arguments? You get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. This is the God of biblical Christianity, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. This is called natural theology. You don't need the Bible to know a creator, sustainer, moral God exists. In fact, when people ask you, how do you know that God exists? I think you ought to say this: I know God by his effects. If there's a creation, that's an effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design, that's an effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on the heart, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a moral law giver. If there's evidence that a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause. Who could have predicted and accomplished a resurrection from the dead? Only a being like God. In other words, you're reasoning from effect to cause. This is what scientists do. Scientists are looking for causes of effects they see. Even if you've had some sort of personal experience with God, you think God has answered your prayer, he's told you something, whatever, you're doing the same thing. You're saying the answered prayer is the effect, and you're reasoning back to a cause, God. You're always reasoning from effect to cause. Here's the biggest problem with atheism: they have no cause. There's no ultimate cause. Christians are the most scientific people out there because we believe in cause and effect. And all the founders of modern science were all Christians because they knew that the universe was orderly. In fact, Kepler said when he's doing science, he's thinking God's thoughts after him. So, how do we know it is the Christian God, though? We've got to go to the next question: are miracles possible? Because God can use a miracle to tell us, hey, obey Moses and Jesus and not say Muhammad. Now, the problem is a lot of people think miracles are impossible. Like, for example, Noah. Christians, can we just admit one thing amongst ourselves here? That Noah and the ark is crazy. And resurrections, who's seen one? Nobody has. How can you believe in a resurrection when you've never seen one? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tail or a tail of a whale? What is the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? Yeah, it's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Here's the interesting thing. Even the atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. Look, if Genesis 1:1 is true, is it possible that these other verses are true as well? Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's a fairy tale unless God exists. Of course resurrections don't happen unless God exists. And yet you've got even atheists now admitting that Genesis 1:1 appears to be true, although they don't think it's God. You know what Stephen Hawking's explanation for Genesis 1:1 is, or for the evidence that the universe had a beginning? And I'm not making this up. This is in his book, the last book he wrote, The Grand Design, on page 180. Here's what he said. Because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Hello, McFly. What? After he wrote that, the esteemed philosopher, mathematician who's a Christian who teaches at Oxford University, John Lennox, said this: when brilliant scientists talk nonsense, it's still nonsense. Now, I don't have time to go into all the details on miracles, but a lot of people think, well, I've never seen a miracle, so they're, they couldn't have happened. Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize that miracles have to be rare if they're going to get our attention? I mean, what if resurrections occurred routinely? What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody and go, hey, Jesus rose from, like Pastor Steve was saying, hey, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No. It's got to be a rare event. It can't be a regular event. In fact, regular events are necessary to allow you to see when a special event occurs. The backdrop of natural law, things happening over and over again, provide the background so when you see a miracle, you go, hey, this doesn't happen every day. There must be somebody behind this. In fact, there are things that happen in our lives that really are spectacular, but since they happen every day, we don't call them miracles, and we sometimes get jaded when they happen. In fact, let me ask you this. How many people in here have seen your own flesh and blood born? Every mother should raise your hand. It's only the fathers I'm asking now. Now, when you see your own flesh and blood come out of you or another human being, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, this is amazing. We made whoopee 9 months ago, and now look at this. How did this happen? It's so incredible, you know there's intelligence behind it. Yeah, you don't call it a miracle because it does happen every day. In fact, biologist Ariel Roth put it this way: God never did a miracle to convince an atheist because his ordinary works provide sufficient evidence. Just look at the person next to you. Why is that person even conscious? Are they conscious? Make sure they're awake. Are they? How does this happen? Just molecules bumping into one another? No, you're created as a representative of the God of the universe. That's why you're here. All right, now, we know that truth exists, we know that God exists, we know that miracles are possible. Now we got to dive into the key question: is the New Testament true, particularly with regard to the resurrection? Now, we're not assuming the Bible's the word of God at this point. We just want to see if data from the text, and even data from outside the text, is reliable enough for us to go, yeah, Jesus died and rose from the dead. And in the book, we have a chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. We don't have time for 10 tonight. We're just gonna look at a couple. We're just gonna look at a couple to see if Jesus really rose from the dead. Are they telling the truth? And the first one I wanna talk about is something called embarrassing stories. What are embarrassing stories? Historians know that when they see something in a text that's embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why? Because you're not going to invent things that embarrass you, right? You might invent things that make you look good. You won't invent things that make you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good. You won't lie to embarrass yourself. Now, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing details and stories they never would have invented. This is true of the Old Testament as well, but we're just looking at the New. That's why we call this the dove factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of them. Peter, the leader of the disciples, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Mark, who wrote this down, at one point said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm gonna make this a real interesting story. I'm gonna have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. This doesn't look good here. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. That's right. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write down something like this. Let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. Some of you will get that tomorrow. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants. Why the women went down to discover the empty tomb. Oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men, it was. But independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story and wanted credibility behind it, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. In fact, one of their prime witnesses was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Gee, what a great credible witness you got there, huh? I actually had a woman come up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I hadn't thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not gonna tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. The nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? I was at the University of Cincinnati last year, and a guy came up to me after, and he said, you think that's bad? I know of a guy who was on a private plane with just the pilot, and the pilot died. And my friend didn't know how to fly the plane. So just like in the movies, the tower talked him down. When he went home that night, his wife said, how was your day, dear? He said, same old, same old. I can't even believe this next verse is in the New Testament, but it is. You know when Jesus takes his disciples up on the hill in Galilee to give them the Great Commission? In Matthew 28, you know, the Great Commission. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples. Anyway, as the disciples are standing there watching him give the Great Commission, it says of the disciples in verse 17, Matthew 28, 17, some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them and they're doubting? It's like they're going, you see that guy over there? Yeah, that guy over there is Jesus. Oh, it can't be Jesus. We just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Jesus is dead. It can't be him. It's him. Do you know what the Romans did to him? They whipped him. They beat him to a pulp. They put nails in him all over. They punctured his side, punctured his heart. Blood and water came out. If they didn't kill him, the Roman soldiers could have been killed. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The woman told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in the text. His own family thinks he's out of his mind. They want to seize him and take him home. This is Mark chapter 3. That's embarrassing. His own brother doesn't believe in him. We learn later, however, that his own brother James does believe in him after the resurrection. In fact, he dies as a martyr in the city of Jerusalem, thrown off the Temple Mount by the Sanhedrin. And it's not even a Bible writer that tells us this. It's Josephus, the Jewish historian, who was in Jerusalem at the time. He tells us that James died as a martyr, when prior to that, he didn't think his brother was God. In fact, before the resurrection, he said, yo, bro, you ain't God. After the resurrection, he said, yo, bro, you're God. Now, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah. You don't believe in him either. Neither did James until the resurrection. Jesus is called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. Do you think they made this up? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Do you think Matthew was writing the genealogies? He said to himself, you know what? I really think I need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes in there. Rahab, Tamar. No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline of the Messiah. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from. Not a good guy. He's the guy that sold his brother Joseph into slavery, and he's the guy that slept with his daughter-in-law Tamar when she was playing a prostitute, yet he's in the bloodline of the Messiah. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in the bloodline. But when Matthew gets to her, he doesn't mention her name. What does he say instead? Uriah's wife. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Who is Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could cover up the crime and have Bathsheba. They're not making this up. They're putting all the embarrassing things in. In fact, Dennis Prager, you guys know who Dennis Prager is? Conservative Jewish man, not a Christian, but he's written commentaries on the Old Testament. He says, the main reason I know the Old Testament's true is because no people group would ever invent such an embarrassing history of themselves. It's true. You don't find any of the pharaohs having prostitutes in their bloodline. Everything's rosy all the time. In fact, the same thing is true today. I don't care who's in the White House. That press secretary is a propagandist. All that press secretary does is try and spin everything because the president never does anything wrong, right? Nothing embarrassing gets past her, right? The Bible's exactly the opposite. It points out all the warts and sins of the people that wrote it down. They're not making it up. There's more embarrassing stuff, but we got to move on. There's one more that we got to handle tonight, and that is excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says that these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had risen from the dead died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying, look, it never happened. And remember, all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, are all Jews. They all think they're God's chosen people. Luke's the only Gentile. And they didn't believe a man could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. And they didn't think one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time. They knew we'd all rise from the dead at the end of time, but they didn't think one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time. And yet that's exactly what they wound up saying. In fact, think about the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection, because there's a stark contrast. Before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice. They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. Suddenly, Jesus comes along and they go, we don't need to slay these lambs anymore, because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. Before they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, Christ's life has fulfilled the binding law of Moses. Before they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they believe in a Trinity. 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, the Trinity's in the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before they believed in the Sabbath. In fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they're worshiping on Sunday, and Paul even says in Colossians 2, don't let anyone tell you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. In fact, out of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament as binding on Christians. What's the only one that isn't? Keep holy the Sabbath. Why? Because the Sabbath has arrived. The rest has arrived. We rest in Jesus. Before, they believed in a conquering Messiah. Afterwards, a sacrificial Messiah. Yes, Jesus will conquer when he comes a second time, but they didn't anticipate the sacrificial Messiah. Before, they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, they believed in baptism and communion. In fact, one other thing, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you this. If you were making up a religion, would you ever pick this as your sign of entry? Who would do this? What do I got to do to join your group? What? I'm out. They're not making this up. Now, what would have caused these people to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so impactful that it can change your perspective 180 degrees. Some impact events are so dramatic that although you might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you'll remember an impact event that happened 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago if you're old enough. In fact, there might only be a couple of you in this room that can answer this question, but it's a particularly good question to ask in Dallas, Texas, or near Dallas, Texas. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, hold your hand up and hold it up high. All right, ladies and gentlemen, see these people with their hands up? These people are very old. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old in 2 days. Yes, I'm 62 years old now. I know. I don't look a day over 61. In fact, when I hit 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're gonna live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. On November 22nd, 1963, I'm standing in our home in Wanamassa, New Jersey, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. What's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see my mother in my mind right now when she was 26 years old sitting on that ottoman. She's 86 today. But I can see her when she was 26. I never saw her cry like that. That's my earliest memory. I don't remember anything before that, and very little after that. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? Those who are old enough, remember, I was in my home near Charlotte, North Carolina, and I had the TV on behind me. I was talking to a pastor on the north side of Charlotte, and we were talking about the topic that I would speak on when I came to his church. And I said, do you have the TV on? He goes, yeah. I said, looks like maybe a Cessna or something hit the World Trade Tower. And we're just talking. And suddenly he screams into the phone, the second tower just got hit. I turned around and looked at the TV. The second tower's on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He goes, no, it was like a United plane. It was a passenger plane. I said, you saw that? It was just on live TV. It just flew right in there. I said, look, let me call you back. For some reason that morning I had CNN on. The communist news network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said, one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple, you dimwit. What do you think, the pilots can't see where they're going? You think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? Come on, this is terrorism. I called that pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 now is over 23 years ago. And for those of you who are old enough, if I were to ask you where you were 23 years ago, you'd know. But if I were to ask you where you were 23 days ago, most of you are going to go, I don't know, let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing that day? Why can you remember something from 23 years ago, but not 23 days ago? No impact event 23 days ago, impact event 23 years ago. Do you think if Jesus really rose from the dead, that would have been an impact event? Do you think they would have remembered everything he said and did, especially over the next 40 days, including miracles? Would they have any trouble remembering that? How else could they go from a group of scared, scattered, skeptical disciples to the most forceful, but peaceful missionary force in the history of the world, and they went to their deaths on account of it. Why would they do this? Why would they abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right? Because he really did rise from the dead. In fact, think about it this way. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they have to gain? Well, they got kicked out of the synagogue, then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're gonna start a new religion. We are? Yeah, what's it gonna get us? First we'll get kicked out of the synagogue, then we'll get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. Now, if you're a Christian, you might get this question. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yes, they're all in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But you know what that question has underneath it most times? An illicit assumption. What's the illicit assumption? People are thinking, well, you really can't trust the New Testament documents because the New Testament documents were written down by believers, so they were biased. You can only trust the non-Christian writers to tell you what really happened. Now, if you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you'll realize how stupid that is. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Nothing. They had everything to lose by saying it was true. And they lost it saying it was true. Some of you may know my friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective, who's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders that are decades old. Jim also has used his homicide skills on the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. So he wrote the book Cold Case Christianity. You can go to coldcasechristianity.com. He's got other great books. And Jim says that whenever he finds a body that he knows has been murdered, he doesn't have to track down 1,000 different possible motivations for the murder. He says, I know that guy was murdered for one or more of these 3 reasons. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power are the 3 motivators that can drive people to murder. In fact, they're the same 3 motivators that can drive any of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. So Jim says, if you're gonna say the New Testament writers invented all this, you gotta find one or more of those 3 motivators. So let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers suddenly get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite of power. They were persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. They have absolutely no motivation to invent this. And then why would they die for a known lie? Now, some of you may be thinking, wait a minute, Frank, are you gonna tell me that martyrdom is somehow evidence for Christianity? If so, don't you have to say martyrdom is evidence for Islam? No, you don't. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs and the New Testament martyrs, but I'm just gonna give you one difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs didn't witness anything that tells them that Islam is true. In fact, Muhammad himself said, I don't do miracles. I'm just a plain warner. I just warn people there's one God. The Muslim martyrs just have faith that Islam is true. The New Testament martyrs, on the other hand, witnessed the resurrected Jesus. They saw Jesus, they touched Jesus, they ate with Jesus, they verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get evidence better than that unless you were there yourself. Now, the last thing I'm gonna say on this, for those of you that believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God like I do, this is gonna sound like heresy, but it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents that we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because they didn't read about it in a book. They witnessed the resurrected Jesus for themselves. Then they wrote it down. In other words, Christianity did not begin with a book. Christianity began with an event, the resurrection. There would be no series of books that we put under one binding we call the New Testament unless that event took place. You wouldn't have Jews in the first century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have these documents written down by Jews in the first century claiming all this and then going to their deaths unless it really happened. Are you with me? So, when somebody says, why do you believe in Christianity? Don't say because the Bible tells me so. That would be like a Muslim coming to you and say, you ought to be a Muslim because the Quran tells you so. No, you ought to give evidence as to why the Bible's telling the truth. And if you can give evidence that why the Bible's telling the truth, then you have a good reason to become a Christian. All right, now, there's other evidence that we don't have time to get into, but the overall argument is this: does truth exist? If somebody says there's no truth, you're gonna ask, does God exist? First argument, this is known as review. First argument, cosmological argument, beginning of the universe. Second argument, the teleological or design argument. Third argument, moral argument. From those three arguments, you get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Creation, Genesis 1:1. If Genesis 1:1 is true, are other miracles at least possible? Of course. And did Jesus rise from the dead? We just looked at a couple of reasons to suggest he has, and there's many more. So if you want to go further, take your phone out and follow that QR code right there. Because that QR code, if you follow it, is going to give you this entire PowerPoint presentation. Now tonight I maybe showed you 30 slides. The whole thing is 362 slides, okay? And you're going to get about 10 other presentations as well, not just I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. It's going to be in a PDF format. If that QR code doesn't work, you can get to the same place by texting the word evidence to 855-909-0582, 855-909-0582. We did bring some books and DVDs if you want to go further, and I want to point out all the proceeds from the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine, okay? Just so you know, I got kids, I need some help, all right? The book we're talking about here is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and you only have 85 shopping days till Christmas. I'm just saying, all right? There's a DVD set that goes through everything visually, presenting the material. It's about 7 hours long. You can also get curricula that goes with it, workbooks on our website, but we have a few of those out there. This book over here, Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. I know that Hollywood puts out a lot of garbage, but you would be shocked to learn that the top blockbuster franchises of the past 50 years have all stolen from the greatest story ever told, the story of Jesus. That book points out that Jesus is the ultimate hero, and guess who's patterned after him? Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Iron Man, Iron Man. Captain America, Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter. Harry Potter? You would be shocked to learn that J.K. Rowling admits she got the storyline from the Bible. So if you know anybody that likes movies, they're gonna like that book and they're gonna love Jesus. Because if they like any of those superheroes, they're just cheap imitations of the real hero, the ultimate hero, Jesus. And then this book over here, Correct Not Politically Correct. This is about same-sex marriage and transgenderism. This was just updated last year to include all the transgender stuff. There are no Bible verses in this book. This is not a biblical case. This is the natural law, common sense, medical case why same-sex marriage and transgenderism are not good for individuals and they're not good for societies. You could give that book to an unbeliever. Okay, it's well documented. There's a lot in there. And in there, by the way, I wrote this book, the first edition in 2008, And I was fired by 2 Fortune 500 companies because I had written this book, even though it never came up at work. Cisco and Bank of America both fired me. I was doing training for them in the name of inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. By the way, that's another reason to be dialed in on the election. There's something out there known as the Equality Act that Democrats want to pass. You know what the Equality Act would mean? That you wouldn't have the same rights as anybody who declares LGBTQ in the public square. And that sex change operations would be paid for by the government. And that your children might be actually taken from you if you don't agree with that. I'm not making this up. You can read the act for yourself. So bottom line, before we get to Q&A, Christianity's true, so what? So what if it's true? Well, the best news of all, somebody actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, which by the way stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself, I was in naval aviation and we had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn, but there's nothing more difficult to earn in the Navy than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs wear. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through, maybe 5%. Those that do make it through wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and they pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed for them, the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. But our culture says, oh no, put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your sexual preference, or put your identity in your job, or another person, or your bank account. Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize all those identities are fragile and temporary? For example, if you put your identity in your sexual preference, what happens when you can no longer sexually perform? You no longer have an identity, or you're no longer sexually preferred. You no longer have an identity, or you put your identity in another person. What happens when, God forbid, that person dies or leaves you? You no longer have an identity, or you lose your job. You no longer have an identity? No. Your identity is not meant to be in these fragile, temporary things that you achieve for yourself. In fact, do you realize that Christianity is the only worldview where you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity? If you have to achieve it, man, all the pressure's on you. And there's always somebody that can do it better. And one day you're not going to be able to do it anymore. Then what? No, you were meant to put your identity in your Savior, who not only died, but he also rose from the dead. You don't achieve it, you receive it. Think about it this way. Everyone you love will die. Everything you build will crumble. Everything you say will be forgotten. Everything you do will come to nothing. You and your identity will die and vanish unless the resurrection's true. As Paul said, if there is no resurrection, let's eat and drink because tomorrow we die. Nothing ultimately matters. But life does matter because the creator of life came into this world, as Stephen was saying, added humanity to his deity, allowed the creatures that rebelled against him to torture and kill him so he could take our punishment upon himself. And then by trusting in him, we're not only forgiven, we're given his righteousness. And we're adopted into the family of God. You can't lose that. That's eternal. That's your identity. Look, there's only two things you're going to get in the afterlife. You're either going to get justice or you're going to get grace. Does anyone here want justice from an infinitely just being? I don't want justice. I want grace. Look, either you're going to pay for what you did or he's going to pay for what you did. What do you want? That's the story of Christianity. He's going to pay and adopt you into his family, but he's not going to force you into heaven against your will. So if you don't want him now, you're not going to want him in eternity. You got to make a choice.